we're trying to grow our business without growing our headcount one for one by using technology, using consultants, and it seems to be working really well.
You're listening to Nonprofits Today, the podcast that showcases the incredible impact nonprofits have in our ever-changing world. The podcast that gets the pulse on today's economic, social, political, and humanitarian climate straight from frontline leaders, innovative changemakers, and courageous risk takers in our communities and around the globe. And now, without further ado, here's your host, Sarah Box.
Welcome back to another episode of Nonprofits Today, where we dive into the heartbeat of nonprofit leadership and innovation, which is super important because nonprofits are nimble and they innovate all the time. Our guest today is Tom Ulbrich, CEO of Goodwill of Western New York, a Forbes Nonprofit Council member, and a seasoned entrepreneur with deep roots in both the nonprofit and the business worlds. So under his leadership, Goodwill of Western New York has not only rebounded post-COVID, but evolved into a model of innovation and impact. And we're going to talk a bit about that today. I'm very curious about the path that they took, the thinking behind it, and what they see today as compared to pre-COVID. But in this episode, along with that, I want to talk to Tom about how he blends nonprofit values and business rigor to create sustainable impact. And, what is an entrepreneurial culture within a nonprofit sector? So with that, let me just formally welcome Tom to the podcast. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Sarah, and thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Well, Goodwill is a name I've grown up with. I know that name. It's been since I've been in the nonprofit world. Goodwill has always been there in the communities I've been in. And I had no idea how different areas ran. So when you came on my radar as a guest, I thought this will be a great interview. But let's start a little bit further back. What brought you to lead Goodwill of Western New York?
Yeah, it's a long story that I'll make it as short as possible.
Okay.
I have a background. My original area of expertise was actually, my first degree was in ornamental horticulture and landscape design. I spent over 20 years inside of a family business, built some other businesses, built an e-commerce company. And then after my kids were in college, I went back to college to get my MBA. I've been doing a lot of work with lobbying for small businesses to support the small business community. Decided I want to run for office and be an elected official. That didn't quite work out. But when I ran for office, I did my MBA at the University of Buffalo, and there was an opportunity to support small businesses at their Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership. So that was my entrance then into the world of academia. I kept my businesses running over here with some talent that kept everything going. And I worked at the university for 12 years, mostly supporting entrepreneurs. I taught entrepreneurship, and I was an assistant dean in the School of Management. And then as I got a little bit later in my career, I got interested in the intersection of the for-profit and the nonprofit sector. Also had an appointment then the last couple of years I was at the university as an assistant dean at the School of Social Work. So I had this really, really interesting opportunity to work for two deans from two schools that everybody thinks are very different, but I recognize that there's a lot of social work in entrepreneurship. And that what I mean by that is it's all about people in the end, right? Entrepreneurs are, there's a lot of crossover back and forth that I noticed, and was very interested in that intersection of the two sectors. I was doing a lot of work, what we called the entrepreneurial nonprofit. I was recruited in 2019 to come to Goodwill. I ignored the recruiter for many, many, many months, I think. And right around November 2019, December, we came to an agreement. And basically, I was challenged, like, you do this academically, why don't you come out in the real world and we have a test case for you. So January, I believe February, I signed my letter of intent to come here, wanted to stay at the university to get through the semester, get my students through, which would have been May. And in between, there's this little thing popped up called COVID. that I had heard about in China back in maybe January, early February. And by the time I got to Goodwill, May 1st, 2020, our entire organization was shut down. At the time, we had 240 employees. When I came, every store was shut, every workforce program was shut. And we had 3 people out of 240 people, I think, working at that time. So that was sort of my background and my introduction to the nonprofit world.
Well, that's definitely a quick jump into the deep end of the pool.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
it's different than the test case, like let's take your academics and put them into play. It's like, and let's do that while you're running from a storm, you know. So how many offices, when you talked about your programs and all of that, so you took those 242 people and you were down to 3?
Right.
How
Yep.
did you communicate that to the community you were serving? Or was it like the doors, lights are on one day?
Yeah, New York State was very a lot of stuff was mandatory across the state. So there wasn't much to communicate because the state was controlling the shutdown of businesses and stuff. And I know there was a lot parts of the country handle it differently, but New York State shut down retail, most activity for a long time. So there really wasn't communication, but there was certainly a lot of change management to do after we started ramping back up and starting to come out of COVID. And just a little other quick background that I think is interesting. A lot of the work that our Goodwill had done, and I think when you did the introduction, you alluded to what's interesting about Goodwill. Goodwill is a federated model. So there's 154 cities or areas that have Goodwills, but they're all run by independent boards. So there's a parent organization. So the nice thing about the Goodwills are they serve the communities for the needs of the individual communities. And I only say that because every community maybe does something different around workforce development. And the model it's a social innovation model where we use people's donations, turn them into dollars, and use those dollars to fund our mission, which is getting people jobs. That's our mission here in Buffalo. But real quickly, a lot of work that we had done in the Buffalo market was serving people with disabilities under a 14C or sub-minimum wage certificate that was closed down. And I signed that certificate away the 4th day I was here. So our history changed. We had a beloved leader that had retired. We had signed away most of our funding because the organization was forced to move in a different direction. And then there was COVID. So lots of crisis, but I think where entrepreneurship plays in is in crisis, there's opportunity. As horrible as COVID was, there's a lot of opportunity to pivot and make changes. And we can dig into that a little bit if you want about the changes that we had to undergo, but they were significant for sure.
I do think it's helpful to talk a little bit about the changes, but also the mindset, because you were still working with a board, or were you still working? Okay, so you still had a board, you had the whopping 3 employees, and you collectively are managing this huge change. And you can talk about it like it's just a thing, but it actually is can be very tough on folks because they're letting go, they're having to create new, there's uncertainty. I mean, COVID was uncertain for everybody. You talked about, I interviewed a gal yesterday who talked about she, similar to you, she just signed on with a national organization and boom, she goes, here I'm thinking I might just have to move my vacation to June. And now I'm thinking this may not stop for a long time.
Right.
So how did you keep people together in that change process?
Yeah. Well, the reality is that over time, we didn't keep everybody together. So we had over probably 2 or 3 years, we turned over a lot of the team. Not that we let people go, but people chose. It was a very different work space or workplace. And the reason being, when you serve people with disabilities, you're serving the people and the families. And it becomes very much like people would be here 25, 30 years. And that all ended. So that's a little bit different environment. Now the new CEO comes in. So what we did really was this: we looked at what does the future look like, and the first thing I thought about is how do we keep our people safe. So that was my number one concern. Now I look back at COVID and we know things a lot differently that we did not know back then. It was scary. Even when I came, our transition, I remember the past CEO handing me the keys with tongs because nobody knew, like, if you wanted to touch things or so. What really I thought about was change management. We had to determine what is the goodwill of the future look like in Western New York. The good news is our board and this goodwill was 100 plus years old when I came. It's now 106 years old. It is known for innovation. It has over time innovated to the needs of the community, and a lot of nonprofits do that, as you said. Back during the war, our Goodwill worked with the Curtiss Wright factory to help build airplanes. And you can see all these different things that we've done. So there's an openness to innovate, and the innovative process was really about what are the needs of the community post COVID-19. So I went back to university with our small team. We did a lot of research to say, what does Buffalo, Western New York need in workforce development? We didn't want to replicate things, duplicate things. And what we found is there was a great need to train. There were jobs open in manufacturing and tech that did not require advanced degrees. And so we had employers over here with jobs, and there were lots and lots of people that lost their jobs. We're a town close to the Canadian border. Of course, we're next to Niagara Falls. So there's a lot of service type of jobs, and those were the jobs that got wiped out. So we identified the opportunity to create a program to train people with high school diplomas or GEDs for jobs in tech and advanced manufacturing that only required a high school diploma. And the thinking behind this was, let's make sure that we get people on a career path, not just a job, but a path where they can continue to train and get upskilled. And these jobs mean over $1.2 million of additional income for a family over 20-year career. So it's a big deal. So I'm going on, but how did we do it? After we had the information, really what I thought about a lot was change management, and you asked about messaging. And I think a lot of it is creating a bold vision. And as the leader, your job is kind of hold that vision and that flag high for everybody constantly. And I also think about a lot of organizations, people join an organization, they begin to belong, and then they sort of believe. I tried to flip that on its head and say, we have to create something that people can get excited about and believe in first. Then they'll feel like they'll belong, then they'll join, or really feel like they're part of the team. So that's a lot of the work we did, which would be just change management work. And the team was the whole management team was brand new. And just, one thing led to another. And today I can say that team has done an incredible job. We've nearly tripled our business in the past 4 years. The stores are growing. We're on our way to self-funding our workforce development. So by 2030, we hope to be 90% self-funded, where we won't need to be asking for grants. And that's the way we're headed right now.
That's a very business model.
I guess bringing business inside. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and also thinking that you're not wanting, from an entrepreneurial or that side of a business side, you're not wanting to live on loans, right?
No.
Which a grant is, even though you're not necessarily paying it back, it's not yours, or could be called. So, I mean, just taking that uncertainty out. So your goal of 90% self-funded by 2030 is amazing, because you weathered 100% shutdown, but a 10% is not as tough to weather if something.
Exactly. Right? And that was the motivation, really, when you see, and I have to say, in all fairness to every nonprofit in the world out there, we have a unique ability to generate revenue that many nonprofits don't. And I'm grateful for that opportunity, and our team is. We still have to do it well, and we still have to do it profitably. We have to run a really, really good business. So I really think about running our stores as business-like as possible, very process-driven, best of best business practices in order to generate that profit, well, carry, whatever we want to call it in the nonprofit world, over to the mission side to support the mission side. We were also fortunate in the fact that that research I mentioned earlier was early research post-COVID that got picked up. That was some of the earliest research done in the country. So it got picked up across the country, and we were able to raise over $7 million of grant funding as a bridge to self-sustainability. So we have a 4-year grant. We're in year 3 now. As we're building up the retail business, we have the federal government, the state, philanthropy supporting our vision towards self-sustainability, or 90% self-sustainability, which is, again, a big advantage that a lot of organizations don't have. But we'll take every advantage we can get.
Yeah.
So
I think part of it's the mindset. They might not have the same advantages or because the work they do and that type of thing. But I also think having that as a goal of like creating reserves that carry over so that you're not on a tiny, tiny margin and a slip away from having to shut your doors. Having that mindset from the board level down, and it may take you years to get where you're more stable, but once you are, it also frees you to do some innovation that you might not have otherwise been able to do if you're having to just do what the grant outlines for you.
Yeah, for
now,
sure.
Is your job training still primarily in the tech area and
so tech adjacent or tech enabled jobs, which are a lot of jobs today. And then we also have a vertical around advanced manufacturing. Buffalo is very much a manufacturing town still to this day. Lots of small manufacturers, some larger too, like General Motors is here. Tesla is here. So that's the area. And the way we built it was a lot of workforce development, I believe, falls apart because organizations often create training that don't have a job at the end. And to be honest with you, one of the things we heard when we did the research and interviewing our stakeholders were things like, I don't need another piece of paper. I need a job. So we thought it was very important to have employer and the individuals we work with equal partners at the table. So the employers help us understand what do they need from people graduating from our program for them to be successful in their organization. So I think that duality is super, super important to the work that we do. And the way we got in those two sectors was really, that's what our community needs. We have a graying workforce in manufacturing. Over 10,000 jobs are going to open up in the next 10 years, 10, 15 years, something like that. So it was based on the demand of the community or of the ecosystem, I should say.
Well, and you're keeping your eye on what that is, right? To be able to say we have this coming up, which leads me to a question about how you approach your planning and your strategic planning, your longer term planning.
Yes.
There's a particular approach that you use and how far out you typically think about that.
Yeah, so we do a lot of strategic planning. We try to keep it simple. So in my past life, I did a lot of consulting, and I was a coach with Gazelles or Scaling Up. Other people are using EOS, it's called. So we try to use what I call one-page plan, which is really a bit more than one page, but a consolidated plan, because a lot of strategic planning I've seen, you get a 3-ring binder full of stuff that goes up on a shelf, collects dust, and never again. If I reach over to my right, our strategic plan is on people's desks, on the walls next to them. We refer to them all the time. So the methodology that we use is really, how far out do we look, first of all? I like to look far and then break it down into quicker. So our big, bold vision was 10 years out. 2020, we looked 2030. Some people call it bold vision, big, hairy, audacious goal. something that we believe we can do, but we barely believe we can do it. And I think that's super important because bold visions excite and ignite people. And I think often, especially in nonprofits, we're not bold. We're not bold enough. We're just like worried about how do we get to that next level. And when you have a bold vision, you also start to get a little bit, we talk about a moonshot mentality, like how can we 10x our impact without adding people? So it forces you to look at technology and different ways to do things. So first we have that, and then we break it down into 3-year. We're really looking at 3 years, which are then broken into a year at a time and then a quarter at a time. And the methodology is simply a gap analysis. We looked at our as-is state, looked at the infrastructure we had, the resources we have. We looked at our to-be state, what we wanted to be 10 years from now. And then the gap in between that and that 10-year was what resource do we need? What type of individuals do we need? What skill sets? What jobs? That gap in between is, I think, what's really important. And it's crossing that chasm. That's what strategy to me is about, is that how do you develop the capabilities? And the first question is when you do the to-be state, it can't be so far out that you don't have the ability to build the capabilities. Otherwise, it's just a dream. And then we just really kind of chunk it down, and then we back all that up with OKRs, so objectives and key results, to just keep people on task and keep those things that are important. And I'll just finish by saying my team is incredibly important to our success. We talked about I'm an entrepreneur, and most people know many entrepreneurs are, I don't want to say dreamers, but
they can be a bit flighty.
They can be a bit flighty. And my team's job is to say, okay, Tom, like that's not strategy anymore because you're asking us to do 500 things. And a great strategic plan isn't what you're going to do, it's what you're not going to do, right? I think that's the best strategy in the world. So I rely on my team to like get the hook and pull me back in as needed. And they do that well.
It's good to have a mix of types on a team for that exact reason.
Yes.
Someone go, I didn't see that anywhere in our plan. And how does that going to get us to 2030? And be open. And maybe something comes up that would get you there, but it's just not off the top of one person's head and say, we're going to do this.
Right. And we probably a bad terminology, but when we go into meeting, I call it the war room, and the rules in the war room are anything goes. Like I'm no more important than anybody else. And the rule leaving the war room is we all leave as one. So in that room, I encourage, just like you said, discourse is encouraged, disagreement is encouraged, and quite frankly, the best ideas never come from me. If I'm being really honest with you, they never come from me. They come from the directors and the VP level that are a little bit closer to everyday activity, and we'll take my big idea and go, like you said, okay, let's how can we make this more realistic?
It's a beautiful thing in your life when you realize that you're someone who can mess a process up by offering too much. Just go, let's see what the team has first.
Yeah. And I think related to that, for if people are interested in strategy, I think a really important aspect of strategy, sort of to your point, a lot of leaders can, I don't want to say mess things up, but we always try to like the CEO speaks last, because it's really important to let everybody else have their voice, I believe, because otherwise people tend to follow, thinking, I don't think anybody does it, consciously, but it's a subconscious, like, oh, that's where the leader wants to go. How can I support that? Versus getting that real discourse that you need to get deeper into what are the true activities you need to be successful.
Yeah, I actually intentionally walked into it was a pretty large, a little bit political planning session, and told the leader, I said, who I'd known for a while, but not in this context, where I'm coming in and doing this for him. I said, I just need a word with you. And he's so engaging and effervescent. And I said, I have a request, and I need you to say yes to it before I tell you what it is. And he says, okay, am I going to be? I said, you'll be able to do it, but I need the yes up front. So I said, I need you not to say anything until I come and say, hey, what do you think about this? And he
Yeah.
goes, oh, okay. And I said, and I'm not going to do that until everybody else has talked. And he looks at me and I could feel him go, but, and I said, it'll work out, trust me. And it did, but it was that thing. It's like, oh, he's so charismatic that people will just subconsciously get on board, or they're just going to say the decision's been made. So
Right. So what's the sense of giving
yeah,
the feedback? But yeah.
But the first time I said you can't talk, I thought, oh, we'll see how this goes. But it went well. But you mentioned that you were consulting.
Mm-hmm.
I've done that. I do that. But in terms of the nonprofit itself, is that something that you invest in, consulting?
Yeah. So maybe it's my coming from the for-profit sector too, and having my own businesses. We invest heavily in consulting. I would say we probably are spending $350,000, $400,000 a year on consulting. Now, we're not a small nonprofit, but we're not a giant nonprofit either. And the reason we do that, I think it's really important to, one, it controls our costs because we're not bringing in an employee that we might need for a project, right? But more importantly, I have always found that you can get much better expertise for certain projects in certain areas, and a deeper level of understanding that you're ever going to get out of a single person. So I think the investment is really important. Our board is very supportive of it. I think a lot of boards in a nonprofit go, whoa, what are you doing? But it's really the return on investment is just incredible. I've talked a little bit about our growth, but I'll just give a little side example. One of my companies I had was an e-commerce company. When I first got here, we had a very small e-commerce business. I'm like, oh, there's a huge opportunity here. We brought in an e-commerce consultant and we built what was like an $80,000 business unit for us. This year will be about $1.6, $1.7 million. That was largely driven by a project with a consulting firm that helped us think about how could Goodwill of Western New York really enter that e-commerce space. And we have done that successfully. So that's just one example, but I think it's really important for people to consider that. And it also, back to cost, it really does. I guess there's more cost initially, but long term, there's not. Because we're really trying to, as we grow the company, we're trying to use technology, outside expertise, and not my saying, but I like what Jack Welch used to say, less people being paid more, doing good work. So we're trying to grow our business without growing our headcount one for one by using technology, using consultants, and it seems to be working really well.
Yeah. What other areas do you use it in? I mean, the e-commerce, I could see that because it's a little outside of the day-to-day, but what other types of areas?
So we use it in logistics. So a lot of our business, we have to move product around. We've used it in logistics before, warehouse optimization. We use consulting. We use a lot of consulting in leadership. So I believe in having a learning culture, a culture of continuous learning. And I think it's really important that you're investing in your team members, especially management, all managers, and helping them get to where they want to go, whether that's at Goodwill or it's somewhere else. And I found the more you invest in people, the longer they actually stay. Even if you know that they have a dream of doing something else, when you're investing in their development. So we use a lot of leadership and outside consulting for that aspect of things.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm thinking of the listeners thinking, wow, how might this apply to us or our organization, or where might we get benefit from using an outside consultant for a shorter amount of time or even longer, depending on the specifics of the organization?
Sure. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that question.
It was just a reflection back on what you said, that
Gotcha.
as I'm listening to, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it, because I'm trying to listen while I interview you as a nonprofit leader at this moment, thinking, I'm not sure where I would use that, and going, okay, well, here's some ideas of where you could use it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I would imagine, I did want to go backwards on one question that's kind of this. When you partner with the businesses, I'm going back to your training, program, do they have a spot saved for the people you're training, or they're just trying to help you get people that will match those spots?
So they don't have a guaranteed spot, saved, but we do a career fair at the end of our training program, and most of those employers will be there. The way they're involved, though, is many of them want to give back to community. Many of them are looking to solve a challenge that they have. So the other relationship with the employers is not just helping create content, but we also in our program give people experiential learning opportunities. So they'll go to a manufacturer, work on a floor for a couple weeks in the afternoons to do different jobs, and that's really important so that people can see, they may not like manufacturing. And another thing I don't like about workforce development, we should not ram people into a career that they may not enjoy. So people can see that. And the other important thing is many of people that we work with think of manufacturing as dirty, oily, greasy, this old-fashioned manufacturing, and it gives them an opportunity to see, no, it's not necessarily that way. We have some locations where they're sterile, where people have white coats and protective booties on to make sure everything stays clean. So they're involved in that experiential learning piece. And, this may be of interest to other people that maybe listen that are involved in workforce development. One of the interesting findings in talking to employers, and we talk to them all the time, is what they're really looking for are people that are able to show up on time for work consistently, communicate well with other people, take direction. It's really basic workforce readiness. They're willing to do the more advanced training. And that, I guess it's just sort of a reflection on society, the challenge that they have finding people that are just reliable. And that's a lot of what we teach are just readiness skills, like workforce readiness skills.
Are you seeing any improvements across the board in that? I'm imagining you are the folks that you're working with, but I mean, are you seeing us kind of come back to a little more readiness?
The people we work with, yes. In general, I can't say I see it. So I'm just thinking, the reason I pause there for a minute, I'm thinking about our workforce programs. In a sense, we have another whole workforce. We have 175 people in our own retail. It's very individualistic is the way I do see when people go how important mental health is. Those are really good things for our society, I believe, that I don't want to say didn't exist, but were not so important in my early work career. It was really, how hard can you work and who's there the longest, and which really in the end has nothing to do with productivity, I suppose. So.
No, and overall work performance or enjoyment. I mean, that kind of stuff can really wear down a team and the results.
Yes.
People show up kind of not 100%. So, in fact, I'm just working on a retreat with an organization, and that's the executive director. She says, yeah, I just had one of the team members. We could do this. And she goes, our theme right now is, what is enough?
Wow. Yeah, that's important, right? Like,
isn't that powerful?
What do you say no to so you can do some things really, really well? And especially in nonprofits, right? There's all types of nonprofits, but there's many that serve individuals with a lot of barriers and challenges that it can be, I think, really mentally draining on the people that are doing that work. It's hard work all day long, and you do need, I think, some deep breaths and some mental awareness and mental breaks to take care of yourself. So, as you said or alluded to, you can be your best self when you show up for work.
Well, and that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, also about the leadership, the work that you do in addition with your consultants, on not just the logistics side, but also the leadership, the development kinds of things that can include that type of awareness and strategy and stuff. So it is a different day of work. And so that's why I ask. I just am curious what you're seeing. I don't know that there's a final yay or nay on anything. We're just in transition. And so I like to observe and see. And there's some really great stuff coming out from the multi-generational when you get a chance to sit and talk to each other about what's working here. How
Yeah.
might we leverage what's working here?
Yeah.
Because I'm
Yeah.
not going to be the first person that goes to tech. I love tech, but I'm not going to want to muck around with it until you
Right.
come and say, hey, this is our new tech. And I'm 100% on board.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, as we're kind of wrapping this up, 2 questions. And when you're
Yes.
thinking about the nonprofit executives listening or the folks across any level of the nonprofit, what is one principle they could apply right now that would strengthen their organization?
I think I always think a lot comes down to leadership. And what I see that many people do, as leaders, I don't think we motivate anybody. Let me just start there. And there's a lot of talk around motivation. I think what we can do is inspire and influence people. So I think if leaders focus on their influencing skills, I think they can help their organizations be stronger. And what I mean by that, we're all emotional beings. Every one of us needs to be approached slightly differently. And sometimes you try to put everybody in a box and say, well, I'm this type of leader. And really, I think leadership is very situational. Sometimes it requires command and control. Sometimes it requires coming alongside somebody. So I think those skills of influencing are really a game changer in an organization. If you can get the leadership team to understand that every team member is individual. We talk, I know a lot of people on here would be familiar with trauma-informed care, but we try to simplify it a little bit and say behind every face or behind every door is a story. And we only know what we see, right? And recognizing that we need to know as much as we can about somebody's story so we can interact with them and help connect to them in our own individual way without knowing too much about their story. Because there's, in the workplace, there's our boundaries and there are limits to that. But I think that's really important.
Okay, my final question before we sign off here is, what does success look like to you personally and professionally at this stage in your career?
Yeah, so at this stage of my career, success is, I'm approaching, I'm not at the end of my career, but approaching, I really want to see Goodwill to that independence I talked about. And personally, it's watching, I'm at a point in my career where I'm really excited to help develop other leaders, especially within our team. We have a very young management team, and to think where some of these people in their mid 30s to mid 40s are gonna be as leaders themselves, leading other organizations, that kind of is what jazzes me every day. How can I help them get to their next step?
Well, great. With that, I want to thank you for being a guest. And I just appreciate all your insights and what you've been sharing.
Yeah, well, thank you I really appreciate the opportunity to share it. I think that's another thing as I get older is like sharing and giving back is really important. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to do that.
Thanks, Tom. Hey, have a great weekend.
Yeah, and thanks again for inviting us on. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I learned a lot from you, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Be in touch. Bye.
You've been listening to Nonprofits Today with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic nonprofit coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah and the Sandbox team at sarahbox.com. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible, so be sure to rate, review, and share this podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. And be sure to tune in and power up with future episodes of Nonprofits Today.